Previously on Awkward GM.
I'm gonna take this Mage Awakening icon and I'm going to put it in hate.
On the internet, the people are represented by two separate but equally nerdy dorks. Chun chun!
All right.
In any case, shall we go to the first grievance, the first charge of sensory range negating the limitations placed on aim spells and reducing the use of aim spells. For those who don't know what aim spells are essentially when a mage throws a spell, sort of like a fireball or something, visibly.
They can even finger gun beams of energy to do it with firearms.
But it is a dexterity plus, I believe, either athletics or firearms roll, whichever one's better, I think.
No, it is Gnosis, I believe.
Oh, Gnosis plus firearms minus the defense of the target. Now, in Mage, there is the concept of sensory range, which is an advanced reach. It costs a reach to go from an aim spell to sensory range, and that reach grants you the ability to hit anyone within your senses. So if you see the person, if you hear the person, you can cast a spell at said person. It ignores cover, as opposed to an aim spell, which I believe doesn't ignore cover, and is essentially 100 times better than ever casting an aim spell. So far, having had multiple mage players, I have never seen a mage player ever use an aim spell in my life. I have had at least 5 mage players all playing different characters. I have one mage player who has literally played about 6 or 7 different mage characters throughout the course of our campaign.
And every time they had to spend one reach.
For sensory range, yes.
Yes. And that is exactly it. They're spending reach. That is what it is there for. And casting a spell at your maximum difficulty, what you are pushing the limits on, you get one free reach. So you have to decide, am I casting this instantly? Or am I casting it at sensory range? Also, if they're casting every spell at sensory range, they are wasting some reach anytime they want to use an AoE effect. Because if you're saying that area there, so long as it is in range, which is Gnosis times 10, 20, and 40, you're rolling a pretty decent handful of dice, and all you need is one success because the ground does not have any defense. So it's literally just lob it over there. Now, that said, big scintillating sparks of energy and stuff like that does make a spell obvious. But yeah, if you're in spell combat with another mage and it's whacking wild anyways, or there's no sleepers around, stuff like that, yeah, you don't need to spend it at sensory range. Just go and launch it over there and hope that you're even close and you're good. But no, it takes up reach. And as like I said, at that level, now you're starting to be like, well, I need instant and sensory range. Well, time to dump a bunch of mana to deal with the overreaching paradox.
But if your Gnosis is above the Arcana rating of the, if your Arcana rating is above the Arcana dot used for a spell, you get additional reaches, correct?
Mm-hmm. Right.
And do you also get additional reaches if it's a rote or a practice or a praxis?
A rote will give you as if you had a master level of Arcana, so 5 dots. So it still means if you're casting Ex Nihilo, the matter spell that just pops things out of existence, cool, terrific. At max, you will have 1 free reach.
But if you're, say, casting a spell that does bashing damage or lethal damage, you would have possibly
2 to 3.
2 to 3. extra reach.
At max, casting a bashing damage spell, you will have 3 free reach max.
So, are there effects that you have ever found that you needed to get off for a spell and gave up sensory range in order to do so? Have your players ever done that more so? 'Cause your
Very
players-
often they've gone, it's like, I don't need sensory range to do that. I can literally, like, buffing spells. Why do you need sensory range? Walk over and go tag, 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 tag. All right, we all get this effect, or I'm going to cast on this wall, or obviously anything that they cast on themselves.
So, what about for casting against an enemy? Have you ever had them use a thrown spell against an enemy?
Yep, especially
A lot?
not very often, and it there's a wonderful mage merit, I guess is probably a better term to say that, called fast spells.
Yes.
And yeah, you better believe, I'm just gonna shoot, because it's tied to firearms already, that merit is tied to firearms, so it's Gnosis plus firearms, and then defense doesn't apply unless you can dodge bullets. So vampires, maybe, werewolves, no, but actually,
I think werewolves in Garu form,
maybe, I can't remember if that's one that they need a gift for, but yes, some mages could dodge, but there's a lot of stuff that, you don't get to dodge this, and so you're rolling with that particular merit. You're rolling three dice to hit a target, and that's bare minimum. Very likely, you're talking 4, 5, 6 before spending willpower. So it is very much a question of, do you want to spend that reach or not?
Would you say this feature is probably very core to the identity of mage sensory range? Because to me, it always so to me, when I think of how I sometimes I get very granular in how I think about game mechanics, which might be too much for, of course, a book like this where they have a minimum amount of word count and everything. But when I think about spell casting, and then I think, okay, it costs 1 reach to go to sensory range, I think, man, sensory range is really powerful, not just because it could be someone who you can see from a very far distance away, but it can also be someone who is on the floor above you and you can hear their feet stomping. It can be, it seems like it's a lot. You're spending 1 resource to get a whole lot of things all at once. You can smell the person.
That's accurate for, I would definitely not allow, that is one thing to actually bring up, is the limitations of sensory range. Smell is not enough. Smell tells you somebody is nearby. It does not tell you, like, you can target the scent, right? Mm-hmm. And if you were like casting a life spell to get rid of something or to track something, sure. But a person, man, you definitely need to be perceiving them. That is one thing that has come up frequently, is what is the limit of sensory range? It comes up in my Discord all the time. Hey, isn't the moon in sensory range? No, the moon is not in sensory range. Several buildings over, the rooftop is probably not in sensory range. You need to, for my games, storytellers do what you want, but there's a limit. And specifically because, and this is something I'm going to say a lot in defense of Mage the Awakening, Your Honor, and the court, is that anything that the players can do, the enemies can do. And that is a thing to bring up frequently, because, all you have to do is you can hear them through the wall, and therefore you can cast a spell on them. Sure. And I will write that down as now a thing that all your enemies are now capable of doing to you and your loved ones.
I have not had it happen often, but I have had situations where players have argued in multiple sessions the opposite of what they were arguing in the previous session
Mm-hmm.
because it does no longer benefits them.
House rules and clarifications should be written down.
I honestly had thought of the possibility of limiting the range of sensory range by gnosis. And by each gnosis is essentially sort of like either the length of a football field or a mile or something.
A mile is way too much. Way too much. If maybe they have forces to give them telescopic vision, I might allow it. But by default, actually, we discussed it in Into the West with my my Space Mage player, and it was like, okay, what are we talking about? What is sensory range? It's like, well, it's where you, for me, is where you can still have a conversation, air quote. You might be shouting at the top of your lungs, but you can be able to see and perceive and understand what you are hearing and seeing. Now, magic may change that. Give yourself super senses with life magic, for instance, and all of a sudden stuff changes. But the length of a football field is really pushing it. 2 is, I believe, where we ended up using that as our limit of sensory range. A mile is far too distant.
Okay. You
Also,
have to have this. Yep.
To bring up your example of doing damage, that's actually one of the few places where sensory range is like really good. But if you were to want to do something like, say, non-combat, use befuddle. Well, actually, probably still in combat, where you want to lower somebody's mental and social stats. Well, yeah, okay, just cast it and you can lower one of their social stats. But I want to do reach so I can lower multiple social stats. Like, I'm having an argument with this person in public. Okay, well, you can lower their manipulation, but their composure is fine, and their presence is fine. Well, I need an additional reach to attack their persuasion, and an additional reach to attack their composure, and you know what? I need another reach to get their resolve, because I'm going to do this big spell and just completely annihilate their mind for a little bit. Well, that's a bunch of reach that starts to add up, and you look at your sensory range and go, you know what? Maybe I'll just shoot this over at them. Now, if they're doing something big and in public, that probably is not the right time to throw a spell. But there are a lot of other spells that do benefit a lot from multiple reach or have larger reaches, where you may need, you know what? I don't want that paradox. That's starting to add up. Let me throw this spell instead.
Is aim spell always seeable by even sleepers? Like, is it, there's always energy?
Yeah, I'm trying to find the
even if it's like you change luck, it has like some sort of effect.
Yeah, I'm trying to find the specific section of description where it mentions it, but there it is. Aim spells appear as bolts of energy or projections coming from the casting mage, as opposed to spells cast at sensory range, which materialize at the point of the subject. Yeah, for me, aim spells are always going to be visible. Even if it's a mind spell, still going to be this weird wave that comes off of you. Yeah, the fireball spell looking like a ball of fire flying through the air, that's obviously, that's what that's going to look like. But even the more subtle, big air quotes,
magics have an effect.
Also,
that's something. Yep. Oh, sorry.
Another issue with sensory range is you need to perceive them right now as you are casting.
Yes.
Aim spells do not. Aim spells can be loaded in your finger gun, and you wait, and then fire because it is done reflexively.
I will bring up that scenario in about 2 sections.
Yep, I saw it. I was like, yeah, we'll have to talk about that too.
The last thing I think I have a question about I don't have a question about sensory range. I have a statement to put towards the court. So sensory range, one reach. Not only does it negate defense, it negates range to an extent, as we've stated. But it also, as you've so eloquently put, it is invisible. It has no discernible source. So if you're casting a fireball on a person, suddenly the person bursts into flames. They aren't being hit by a fireball that someone throws or has an aneurysm.
Mm-hmm.
So that leads to it being three separate really good effects for what could be considered not a lot of cost.
I mean, it is an entire reach. An entire reach. If bear in mind, we're talking about the cost here is the fact that you are risking overreaching, right?
Yeah.
At even Gnosis 3, that's 2 additional paradox dice, regardless if there are sleepers around. Which also means that, okay, that's a paradox roll that you're going to risk, which then you roll wisdom and potentially take bashing damage that doesn't heal magically, or you're spending mana. So don't forget that reach, when spent, also has these knock-on effects, especially because it becomes cumulative. Congratulations, you've overreached even a little bit. Anything else this scene is going to have a little bit more and a little bit more. So combat is another situation where it's like it needs to be done and over with, or your paradox is going to start to accumulate.
Okay. All right. So let's move on to the next charge. Reflexive Mage Armor reduces the penalties of surprise rounds. So if I'm surprising a group of mages, they can, even if I surprise them, they can always activate their Reflexive Mage Armor. I made this note somewhere further down into one of my expectations of mages. The expectation I have is similar to what people talk about with Hunter is a prepared mage is difficult to kill. An unprepared mage is a sitting duck. And I feel like with reflexive mage armor, that sort of negates that aspect a bit.
It
This is
negates is a strong term. Mage armor
I
is super great. It is not infallible, and it is not that amazing by itself.
yeah.
Because
I
you are
mean,
talking about at max from the one that is most destructive to an opponent is mind or death. Death means, hey, non-magical stuff, it's just going to do bashing damage to me.
yeah.
Reduces a lot of that mundane stuff. So that becomes stuff that you can clean up real easy. Mind, on the other hand, is just raw defense. You could use space as well. Or you can do life for straight up armor, but that's all damage reduction. And defense
Yeah.
is, in my mind, the more effective use of armor. But that whole like, oh, you can redirect attacks and stuff like that only happens if you take the dodge action, which you can't do reflexively.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, it is very very good, but I mean, Garu can jump into their other forms reflexively depending on where they are in the harmony scale.
And but that is dependent upon where your character is in the harmony scale. Wisdom doesn't really affect where this is.
No,
Most
your
of
mana
these
does.
yeah, I guess it does. It costs 1 mana to activate it reflexively.
It costs 1 mana
How
to activate it, regardless. But yeah,
yeah. So how much mana, how hard is it to find mana?
depends. I mean, you technically get 3 mana back a day if you're willing to lower an attribute for 24 hours, or if you're willing to take a couple lethal wounds that are non-resistant and therefore cannot be healed away. Um, And that's actually where you get into a prepared mage or not, right? A prepared mage is at least walking around with most of their mana, but you catch a mage who's coming back after a long day of stealing ritual implements from the sleepers because they shouldn't be trusted with them. And they're like, man, there were so many sleepers around. I was spending mana left, right, and center to get rid of Paradox. I'm tapped. And that's when the hunter pops up with a sniper rifle and goes bang. And the mage is like, I have no mana. I cannot activate my mage armor and I can no longer dodge bullets. And I'm just going to take that one in the chest.
This may be an issue on my side for how I run my games, because I used to run my Dungeons and Dragons games very session by session, so every session followed up immediately after the previous session. And then when I started my West Marches open city style game, where sometimes we go weeks without a game, sometimes we'd have like 5 games in a week. We would The way we would run things was out of game time is in game time. So if we were playing today, it is whatever date it is, because I don't want to date the video. And then we play in a week. Well, your character has had a week to heal. How much do they heal?
Yep.
But as far as what we had done with resources like mana and stuff like that, we had to sort of hand wave regaining it between sessions.
And you
And I
did
even
that for
added
the vampires and their ability to hunt.
I did that with them, but the difference with vampires is they always need to spend 1 vitae at the start of a session.
Mhm.
So they're always down 1, so they always have an incentive to go out and get more. And
And it's a quick little die roll. Just
it's
there's a specific section in the book. It's like, hey, you don't need to tie everything up with a hunt every day. You can just roll these 2 dice and just get some blood. Mage can do the same. Not saying anything against that, but 1 vitae is not a big thing for vampires who can just roll some dice and get it.
Yeah. I think as far as the reflexive mage armor goes, it's probably the lowest on the list of my grievances. It's probably like, if I were to say, I would say I don't mind that they can, one of the things I have written down here is from the Dresden Files. Did you ever read the Dresden Files?
Love
at all?
them.
Love them. Kincaid, the assassin,
Mm-hmm.
tells Harry that he'll kill him by sniping him from a long distance away.
He sure does just say that. Yes.
and Harry's like, I don't know what scares me more, that he would do such a thing or that it might actually work.
Yep.
And
also, to bring up one thing, just because I was reminded about it and talking about the stuff being reflexive, there are only a couple of mage armors that even work against surprise attacks, because I brought up the death armor that reduces stuff, but that actually doesn't work against surprise attacks. It's literally space, fate, I think, time and mind. All the rest, just got to suck it up.
Really? Because
Mhm.
isn't reflexive, doesn't that mean that they can activate it during a surprise round as
No.
a reflexive action?
Reflexive means it doesn't take your turn. Very often, surprise rounds do not allow you to take a reflexive action, because that is the whole trick of and notably, the very last paragraph of Mage Armor introduction states, Mage Armors that increase defense work against surprise attacks, which the corollary thereof is Mage Armors that do not increase defense do not work against surprise attacks.
I need to write this down because I didn't even know this.
Yep. That is one of the big reasons why life armor is really nice, because it double dips. It gives you some defense and armor, and lets you change wits to use higher of wits or dexterity as defense rather than the lower. So your defense may jump up considerably if, say, you're a very wits person and normally you're walking around with just your defense, and all of a sudden, oh, wits, plus I get to add life, plus I get some armor. Yeah.
I'm going to throw out this chart. That one was good. That I feel good about that one. Charge 3, the one that took my players a long time to talk about and discuss and debate, and still no right answer came up, was Pattern Restoration. It negates the penalty of a mental condition or physical tilt for 3 mana.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the big problem that we had with this was how aware are mages to supernatural mental conditions, such as something, say, shadow paranoia? Or, like, do they know they've been affected by this mental condition? Or they
That's
condition?
easily covered by Mage Sight, or rather peripheral Mage Sight. They know something supernatural is going on. So that is going to start that investigation using Mage Sight to determine that something is messing with them, and then can resolve that. But you are talking about 3 mana, which for a brand new mage is a third, rounding down, of your mana. That happens over 3 turns. So it's not super easy to do it as a in combat. I mean, you're able to do it as a reflexive. No, actually, it's an instant action.
It's an instant action.
So the first 2 turns. No, hang on. I can't remember the actual order of operations. I believe it's the instant action first, and then you spend mana on the next turn and on the next turn, which is just reflexive, and then the effect actually happens.
Yes.
I cannot quite remember if it may be mana, then the instant action. But
so you need to at least Gnosis 3 for that to
be one
be
instant
one
action.
turn.
Not reflexive, but yeah.
Reflexive.
And then and it does mention here, before the action. It's right there. I should have just read my own book. So yeah, you have to spend as many turns needed before the action to spend the mana, which are reflexive. And if they get interrupted, which also suggests that this is kind of that MMO style, let me channel this thing, and if I get hit, I'm disrupted. I would probably allow other instant actions, but anything that kind of throws them off their groove, they may have to. That's something that you probably want to address, because admittedly, Mage does have some stuff that they kind of leave open to interpretation. So check with your table and storyteller to be like, how do we want to resolve this? Because I agree. Being able to do something like that in the middle of combat, where you're just running around willy nilly, it's a bit much. So I would have some kind of restriction on that, but it is a lot of mana. Even at level Gnosis 5, where mages start. Is it 5 that I'm thinking of? Where you get 15 mana.
That's 5.
That's still a third of your mana to get rid of a mental condition. Meanwhile, the vampire just goes, cool, I'm gonna do it again. And now I've made you burn through 6 mana for, I'm guessing, 2 vitae.
Now here's a question I have, and it's a sort of 2-part question. So you have paradox conditions, and you have wisdom active hubris conditions, such as megalomaniacal and rampant. Would you, as a GM, allow those to be taken away via pattern restoration?
Those are not mental conditions.
What are they?
Well, paradox conditions for the first. Those are not affecting your mind. They are in your Nimbus, your Imago, or your...
Okay.
What's the other one? You brought it up. How do you not have these ready?
I did not. I don't remember. What did
paradox?
I say?
There's paradox. They're in your Nimbus, your Imago, or Abyssal Backlash. So there are things that are affecting you. They are specifically called paradox conditions to separate them away from mental conditions.
Mhm.
And then active. Now, I will say the active hubris ones, yes, they may technically be mental conditions, but again, those are ones that you probably need to be prompted that, hey, are you okay? Is something going wrong? Um, because they're not separated out in any way. Um, trying to see, where's the wisdom section? Yeah, it just says you get a condition. So, um,
Yeah.
and I do believe they are mental conditions, but yes, it does cost you 3 mana to get rid of them. Now, that said, that's a lot of beats that you're giving up if you just go, you know what? I don't want to deal with it. But that's also a very mage thing to do. It's like, oh, you've overdone with your wisdom, your mind is going numb, you're going in weird places, and your cabal mates kind of lean over, buddy, are you doing all right? And you go, oh, I'm not doing all right. Let me cleanse this condition. But I will point out, playing this straight as a narrative game, your mage should not go, oh, I got a condition, and get rid of it. That is not playing the game. That is not playing a storytelling game. That is playing, not to
A game.
disparage it. Yeah, but it is D&D. It is playing it as a game where it's like, this is a negative condition, I'm going to get rid of it.
And,
This is a
and that's
thing
something
to develop your character, to experience some stuff, and to see the bad sides of hubris.
and that's something that I always see with new GMs, especially with Chronicles of Darkness, in any system that's not Dungeons and Dragons, where they'll immediately say stuff like, where are the monster stat blocks? What's the XP budget for this encounter and stuff like that? And you have to step away from that mindset because Dungeons and Dragons was built around with the wargaming mindset. It
Right.
was based off of the wargame Chainmail that Guy Gax wrote, and that was based around you have one army, your opponent has another army. These armies should be equivalent battle strengths,
Right.
and these games like Chronicles of Darkness are narrative games,
They're role-playing
and
games.
they're role-playing games with a lot of narrative elements that are not meant to be gamified in the same way that
You're not
a
trying to
war game
win
is.
here. Yeah.
Exactly.
And as for the monster stat blocks, in Chronicles of Darkness, just a quick reminder for any of you who are new storytellers, there are stat blocks for all the monsters in the games. They're called character sheets. Because in Chronicles of Darkness, you are the monsters, unless you're playing Hunter, in which case you're a demi monster. You're only sort of a monster.
But this goes into the other grievance, other charge I have,
Mm-hmm.
and I feel like I missed it here. I did. I didn't put it here. Abyssal entities. And I did mention this to you quite a while ago. Abyssal entities are such a major uh, aspect of Mage. When you talk about the antagonists of Mage, you have the Seers, who are mages in and of themselves, and then you have abyssal entities, which are creatures of the abyss that are come from wherever paradox is generated
The
from the
Abyss.
abyss itself. And they're such a major antagonist. I wish they had a word count in the book to have elaborated on how abyssal entities work and function in game. Because right now, I look in Mage the Awakening core rules, I do not see anything about how abyssal entities function. That being said, I have some ideas, one of which is a question I have, which is, does magic work on abyssal entities?
Mm-hmm.
Do they have minds? They have minds, they have life, they have they so
Some might have. So the answer to this is kind of fun in the fact that abyssal entities are impossible. They literally can do whatever the hell you want them to do. they can do all sorts of stuff. Now, that said, yes, there's not a lot of details on. Wait, hang on. How do abyssal entities work? You actually get more of that from the discussion of dissonance and curse of quiescence kind of stuff. Because it's kind of sneaky there. But yes, abyssal entities are treated as supernal beings, and when they come across dissonance, it heals them. But yeah, you kind of have to hunt and peck to find abyssal entity stuff in the core book, unfortunately. But
I
yeah.
did find a supplement that I think was called Invaders, maybe,
Mhm.
or something
From first
along
ed.
those
Mhm.
lines, from first ed. As far as a unifying system, there was
Yeah,
none.
there is no unifying system.
Yeah.
Basically, your only unifying stuff comes from, is it a Golmoth or is it the other one? And my mind just went blank.
Don't worry about it.
But yeah, there are two types of entities, and it's basically, are they in spirit twilight and inhabiting that, or are they in mind twilight and astral? That's where
If
abyssal entities exist normally, and then sometimes they'll worm in their way into the physical realm. But 90% of the time, they're hanging out in twilight, messing
Mm.
stuff up and mucking about.
And this is where, when I look at the Werewolf the Forsaken book, the Werewolf the Forsaken book has an entire section dedicated to the Indigum.
Hmm.
And and I feel like Indigum were more likely to be like something that, if I were to bring into the edition, I need to cut something for word count. I'd like, I could simplify Indigum to be spirits whose ban and bane and influence just rotate, and it would still um keep that theme that they're about. But they went the extra mile in that book, or had the word count and could elaborate more on it. And that's the charge I have for abyssal entities. Some people say abyssal entities should always have the influence of paradox, but I very rarely know how that would be implemented. I would like, for me, I'd be like, okay, they have a influence dot from 1 through 5 or whatever because they're a rank 1 through 5 entity. That's how many bonus paradox die get thrown at the player if they're near this creature or try to cast a spell at them.
Sure.
Um, but I also get players who push back saying, "There's no rule for that."
No, there are literally no rules for abyssal entities. Literally, you can do nothing wrong because they are
Mhm.
from a place that does not have rules. It doesn't match up to our existence. Anything goes for them. And personally, you should not treat them as antagonists.
You
Uh,
shouldn't.
they are entities of not reality. They are going to be problems for players, but they should be treated more as Ghostbusters, right? And the ghosts running around that they bust, right? None of these ghosts are necessarily evil. They're causing mischief. They're causing harm.
Mhm.
They're causing property damage, and oh no, that poor hotel. But they're not out to kill people. Now, goes with the Gozerian shows up. That's a whole other thing. But
So what you're saying is sort of like a rank 1 to 3 might be just about causing mischief, but maybe your rank 4 or 5 are more like the big thinkers, as it were, maybe.
because you have to remember that
Mhm.
abyssal entities want to exist. That's all they're asking for. That's all they want to do. But their reality does not match up with ours. So the things that they do, the things that they cause, is literally just to keep themselves alive
Mhm.
and to continue their own existence. The one abyssal entity that I have ever used in yeah, it was in the rookery, had to think, was called Ripple, and it didn't do anything bad. It just showed people alternate realities. That's all it did. Now the fact is, when people come across multiple realities and start living lifetimes in spans of seconds, they get drawn in, hypnotized, and they waste away. That's what was happening to other people, and they had to our mages had to figure out how to get rid of this thing, how to capture it and send it away. And they kind of wanted to study it because they're mages and they can't help themselves. But that's all it was. It wasn't evil, but it was destructive. That's how you play Abyssal, and that the whole idea of Abyss being the bad guy is missing the point. The Exarchs, Seers of the Throne, those are bad guys. Abyssal things are just non-reality entities for you to deal with when you decide to start overreaching.
A force of nature, more or less.
Unnature, sure, yeah.
Unnature. Thank you for that. That was enlightening. And now we have the next charge. I should have numbered these. I think it's charge at this point 5. Withstand negates the ability to resist spells, bypassing supernatural tolerance and rank stats.
Correct.
This is something that has come up in my games quite a bit, where I'll have a character that has I would say something along the lines of I've thrown a slasher at my players that was a horror mixture, so it was the legendary slasher, so it had a potency of 10. It was 10 being the highest. It had all the stats up to pretty high up. Had a mage that had, I think, spent about 9 XP, so enough to get Gnosis 5 and one of their Arcanum up to either a second one up to 3 or one up to 4, I forget which. They did the Shared Fate spell attached to this potency 10 horror, and because his composure was a little bit lower, they managed to hook into this guy and kill him in basically a couple of Shared Fate gunshots. He had like 15 health. They took a gun, shot someone they had put Shared Fate onto like a rat or something, or another person, killed that person, and the slasher died because their lives were connected.
Not going to call you out, Corbin, because this was a decision that you made on the fly, and you are not super familiar with with Mage. But say the rat has 6 health, and that would be a lot of health for a rat. Yeah, you shoot the rat. Okay, this guy takes 6 damage. Withstood by Shared Fate, which composure, blah 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 blah.
Shared Fate, I believe, is a Discipline 3 spell.
It is. Yeah. And so you would do whatever damage was done to the rat, which of course, because of the way lethal and aggravated roll and stuff like that, okay, we say that the slasher took 6 points of damage. And that's absolutely the way that spell works. But you did spend willpower to increase your withstand by 2, right?
I did not, because how would he know that a spell would be cast on him?
That is not how withstand works.
A few moments later.
Okay.
It is, withstand and willpower spends is a 100% out of character activity. If a thing is happening, do I want to spend willpower to withstand it or not? Or same thing with whether or not mages allow a spell to come through, and because they can decide to not withstand something. That is an entirely out of character thing. Now, I will play as a storyteller. I will tell you, a spell is happening to you. You have no idea what's happening. Do you want to withstand? And most of my players go, yes, I want to withstand that. But do you want to spend willpower on that? Because this is coming out of the blue. What is this spell? You don't know. It could be a friend trying to reach out to you telepathically, and he is
Mm.
dealing with sympathetic range and whatever additional withstand from telepathy is, and then you go, I'm going to spend 2 willpower because I don't know what this is, and their desperate plea for please help me, use this telepathic connection to sensory range me out and teleport me home. Nah, they didn't get through because you spent willpower to withstand.
That is an interesting idea. I hadn't thought about someone trying to send a telepathic message out to the players as a warning, and the players thinking it's an attack.
Mm-hmm.
The one issue, the major issue I have with Withstand is it just feels so different than all the other types of roles that we have in Chronicles, because it's a target number to reach over, but it's not like it's a penalty or a contested roll.
Oh,
And I
also
always feel
quick
like,
clarity, because we
yeah,
are presenting this in front of the court and truth matters here. Technically, yes, you may only spend willpower to increase a resistance attribute used for withstanding if they are aware of a spell being cast upon them. So that is true.
oh, so if they don't know a spell's being cast, like the guy in his jail cell, the mage has left, he wouldn't be aware enough to cast that, to use that willpower.
Yep.
Okay. So if someone doesn't know that there's a mage and the mage casts a spell and then uses sensory range because sensory range is invisible, they wouldn't know to use willpower either.
Mages are scary.
Yeah, they are.
But the reason I bring that up is because mages, because of peripheral mage sight, I tend to play a little loose with that happening to players, and that's the issue that I had. It's
Yeah.
like, oh, something weird is happening. You're the target of a spell. You don't know what it is. You don't have time to figure it out, but you know something is happening to you. It's usually how I lean. Just that way I don't completely blindside mage players with, by the way, a really high level mage just ritually cast a kill you spell and is casting it on you sympathetically. You die now. It's
Okay.
kind of some bullshit.
Exactly. But
Sorry,
so
but
so
yes,
what you
withstand.
said so with what you said earlier though, with you add plus 2 willpower to resist a spell without being aware, that's wrong.
Correct. You have to be aware of the spell in order to cast to use willpower to increase your resistance attribute.
Okay. Good. Okay. I was a bit like very happy with that, but now that's I need to take that out of my notes here. Like, so that's something that is probably still going to be an issue for me, because uh resisting spells in other games, or at least resisting abilities in other games, is usually linked to a contested roll
Mm-hmm.
or a penalty that is applied to the roll. For instance, like if you're attacking someone, dexterity plus, or sorry, strength plus brawl minus defense. That's something that is also in a lot of abilities. But for mages, they just have to roll their Gnosis plus Arcana and plus whatever yantras they have, and that can, and whatever like
Spell factors,
additional
the
kind of
negatives.
spell factors. Um, but as far like they just have to reach over that withstand value with their potency in order to get their spell to
To have a
stick.
reduced effect. So you have to remember that withstand is a flat. Depends on the spell. Shared fate, for instance, is you only need 1 potency. Other spells are withstood and are reduced by whatever that attribute is. So befuddle, which I mentioned earlier, reducing somebody's social or mental attributes. Let me double check because we are live in front of a studio audience. Yeah, befuddle is withstood by composure or resolve, depending on which one you are targeting. And if you decide to target their resolve because you want to mess with their mental stats, wait, I might have that backwards. Regardless,
One of those attributes.
Yeah, one of those attributes. And you go, yeah, I'm gonna reduce it by 4. Cool. But how much withstand do they have? 3? Okay, cool. So you get to reduce their stats by 1. You do not get to hit them with the full potency if you beat their withstand. The withstand provides a buffer against potency. So there are many spells that work that way. Shared Fate and Fate spells in general are scary because there's not a lot that you can do to withstand them. But they also don't have a lot of ways to directly damage you.
Okay. There.
Also, in that particular scenario, the mage had to spend additional die to target the rat and the enemy. So they reduced their spell pool even further.
Okay. It can be very tough, and I will get this further down the line, but tough to verify spells.
Mm-hmm.
What they're supposed to do.
Yes.
Now, we'll put that aside for the moment. On the next charge, Counterspell. Counterspell is a core ability of mages. It is literally the first attainment you get when you pick up an Arcanum dot. And if you have Prime, you get Counterspell, I believe, for all spell types. That is very flexible, which I think is a good theme mages have.
Mm-hmm.
The issue I have is not with mages in this regard. My issue with this is in regards to other supernatural types being able to resist to use counterspell-like abilities. Because counterspelling is usually highly specific to each splat type, and doesn't really exist for some other splat types. For instance, mummies have Rebuke the Vizier, which is a special utterance.
It is scary for every mage everywhere. We don't like mummies. We can get rid of that ability. We don't like that.
I have definitely heard things in the ether about some mage players being very unhappy that mummies got rebuke the Vizier and it being applicable to them. I also have heard people say that they're very upset that mummies aren't affected by fate or time magic.
Suck it up.
Suck it up. I had a sidebar.
Vampires are barely affected by life magic, so
let's go to the sidebar over here where the barista is. Oh no, it's a barrister. Well, barista as well is here. The one thing I really liked, I didn't think of it during my session, but one of my players, they were going up against vampires who were obfuscated and they couldn't figure out how to see them and fight them. So they reversed time to go back to the previous scene. And I'm like, I'm fine with that. That takes me out of a very bad situation. But we had a mummy player who couldn't be taken with them in the time traveling.
Nope.
And I said at the time, he remembers that you went back in time. And they said, no, he can't remember. He's unaffected by time travel. And then I found deep in the like back end of the Mummy the Curse book, it says feeling the flow. It is a feature of mummies where they can sense when time has been messed with, and they get special benefits from it. And it even has one that says they can sense defunct timelines. And I was like, I really enjoyed that combination. I would have really loved it if I could have thrown that into the session, but sadly one of my players said that's not how it worked, and I didn't know Mage that well or Mummy that well.
Yep. The one of the horrors of zoo campaigns.
The horrors of zoo campaigns. You think running a game for one splat is difficult? Try running it for I believe it's 10. I'd have to count it out.
Something like that.
I know
Yep.
I've done alignment charts memes for Chronicles of Darkness, and I always have at least one extra.
11.
I 11. So in regards to that the main point, counterspell. Counterspell is such a unique thing to mage, or such a core thing to mages. And I believe it's a core way of I've talked to players and they've said to me, yes, a mage can cast this spell on themselves, but it can always be counterspelled. And I have
Can
to
be
say to myself,
dispelled.
dispelled.
Two different
or
things.
two
Very,
dis
very different things. But yes.
Let's say dispelled in this regard then.
Oh, okay.
So they always say it can be dispelled or it can be removed. Like they could cast on themselves supernal luck. And I say, well, how do I face how do I deal with supernal luck? I can't really deal with it. And they'll say to me, "Oh, you could dispel it." And I'm like, "Well, this is a zombie lich king type creature. They don't have dispel.
Nope.
What do I do here? Where like do I suddenly have more creatures that have counterspell or dispelling ability?
Two different
If
things
it
that you can do here. Because, so if your argument is talking about dispelling, not counterspelling, because counterspelling is prevents the spell, dispelling
Yeah.
removes an active spell. Do not forget that's what Clash of Wills is for.
Okay.
Because superlative luck, oh, I'm really lucky. Yes, but I'm doing anything supernatural to fuck with your luck. Because it's fun to say that. And I'm trying to mess you up in some way. Cool, Clash of Wills time.
It
And
rhymes,
if
so it
you
must be true.
right, the somewhere in Acanthus is going, yes, that's exactly correct. Except don't mess with my fate. But yeah, superlative luck allows you to get rote quality because you're whatever. If you do anything to apply a countering um, uh, dice trick, so remove 10 again, remove 9 again, anything like that, you now have a Clash of Wills. And one of these gets to work. So they may say, I'm doing, and they do have to declare after the dice are rolled with superlative luck. So there is that to be said. But if I were in your shoes doing this and somebody's like, I have superlative luck, I don't like that roll, and I currently have an effect that is forcing me to lose 10 again, for instance, I'm going to spend one of my uses to get the rote quality on that. Okay, cool. Before you do that, you've already used it. Now Clash of Wills to see if your superlative luck overdoes their reduction of your dice tricks. So that's one of the big things is Clash of Wills.
Okay.
Which is another thing that people can can use willpower on and frequently forget.
That makes sense. Clash of Wills would probably be more what's happening than a spell being cast, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you have to be present in order to use Clash of Wills for everybody except for mages.
That's fair. Okay, damn, makes me want to add I am going to add another charge.
Sure.
You brought it
Bring it
up.
on.
This is you didn't waive your you didn't initiate your Fifth Amendment rights here. It is it is in regards to Clash of Wills.
Mm-hmm.
Quick refresher for me. What is the Clash of Wills that mages use most often? What
Gnosis
are the
plus Arcana.
Gnosis plus Arcana? What do they use for their spellcasting?
Gnosis plus Arcana.
Now, if I were a vampire, what would I use for my Clash of Wills?
Blood potency plus discipline.
Potency plus a discipline. Doesn't it feel like I I always found it interesting. I guess I got this wrong then, because what I had always thought was it was an attribute plus, or sorry, supernatural potency or supernatural tolerance plus an attribute, and I thought that was the case, but with if it's a discipline or if it's like a gift or something, I think I might have made a mistake on this one, adding it in, because maybe the Clash of Wills isn't as bad as I thought, because I always felt like Clash of Wills for mages is two of the stats that a mage wants to be their best. And for other splats, I always thought it was one stat that they want to be their best and one stat which isn't as good. Maybe like with werewolves, it's a bit more like Primal Urge is something that a lot of people say isn't a very strong power stat. Like Primal Urge isn't added to their gifts. Their renown is added to their gifts. So they have they're less likely to have a high Clash of Wills pool. Similarly, I would say what would be Changeling's Clash of Wills pool?
I could not tell you off the top of my head.
Because they don't have dots in a discipline. What they have is they have their weird stat,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't believe they have dots for anything else. They have weird and clarity is their integrity thing. I'm trying to think, what other splats do you know very well?
Oh, I mean, I said I don't know it off the top of my head. Werewolf
Oh.
is Primal Urge plus Renowned. Changelings are Weird plus an appropriate finesse attribute, which is scary. That's irritating.
Why?
So basically, their dexterity, their manipulation, or their wits. So they
But
don't
if
have to work on other attributes. They can just play off of their core attributes.
I would feel like core attributes though are something that are harder to increase than Arcanum. How
I
much
mean,
how
it's
much XP is
XP.
art? Well, it's five. Is it 5 XP or is it 4 XP for attribute? It's 4 XP, I
4 XP
think.
for an
And then
attribute, and I'm pretty sure
and
Arcana is similar but restricted because I
it's
can't remember if you can spend. Uh,
you can
yeah, you
spend
can Arcanum up to a limit.
up to a limit, yeah, and you get arcane beats as well. Sorry.
Hmm?
This feels like this is a very in the weeds moment for me, because
Oh
I'm
yeah,
just
but
thinking
no,
here that
it is 100%. Yeah, like everybody has a slightly different Clash of Wills. You can always throw willpower it if you are present for the effect, unless you're a mage, because their spells are considered they are connected to their spells, and so therefore
yeah,
they are present as long
yeah.
as they haven't relinquished it. If they haven't relinquished it, then it's just a raw Clash of Wills.
Okay. If they do relinquish it, what is it just
It
like
is
the
still a
dots
Clash of
of
Wills, but they cannot spend willpower on it.
okay. Okay.
Which also means that there is some note taking that you should do anytime a mage relinquishes a spell and you're like, that might come up later. Write it down.
Yeah. I definitely don't do that as much as I should. But I don't have my mages relinquish spells a lot of the time. I haven't seen them do it too frequently as of late. So the next charge, Acts of Hubris. Lowering wisdom as a downside has no mechanical penalty, such as those that vampires have with humanity, where it lowers their social roles with mortals. Now, it does have megalomania, megalomaniacal, and rampant, and they can be temporary conditions unless a player chooses to make them persistent, as if it's within their character type. But it does surprise me that wisdom, as far as an integrity equivalent, I hope I'm in screen right now.
Oh, you're good.
As
Yeah,
far
yeah.
as far as it, I just realized. There we go. Back. My lumbar support pillow I was sitting on, as
Oh,
opposed to having it actually on my
doing
lumbar.
its job.
Yes. So it just sort of surprises me because wisdom's an integrity equivalent stat, yet it doesn't really have any mechanical effect until you get down to 0, right? Wisdom 1 or 0. What's the mechanical effect?
So yeah, the mechanical effect 1 affects your ability to contain paradox. If you decide you are that asshole who does. Sorry, Corbin, I just realized I'm cursing slightly. Are you okay with that in your videos?
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Okay.
Profanity cheapens the soul and weakens the mind.
There are no children.
Yeah, that's kind of what that had been my assumption. I realized I should have checked. Check the rules of the house, right? But yes, if you are that asshole who releases paradox, then the lower your wisdom gets, the longer the paradox effects exist. So if you're at an enlightened tier, they only last for a scene and then they go away. But if you get down lower, it starts to tick on for a day, for a month, for a year. If, however, you're trying to contain it, you're rolling less wisdom, which means that you are having worse and worse paradox conditions. And now the flip side is the lower your wisdom, the shorter those paradox conditions last.
Wait a minute, can you say that last part again?
Okay.
The lower your wisdom is, the longer it lasts?
No,
Or the shorter?
the shorter it lasts for if you are containing and taking on the paradox. If you are releasing it, then the effects last longer on the outside world because basically you are out of control of paradox and out of control of your spells. So for instance, paradox conditions happen when you obtain a dramatic failure when casting a spell after incurring paradox, netting a exceptional success on a release paradox roll. So not only have you released paradox, now you've also got yourself a condition, or you fail to fully contain a paradox. Basically, you either need to accept the negative conditions of the paradox, in which case it is in your pattern, and then you beat it by doing a thing, or you allow it to lapse, and it lapses after a certain amount of time based off of your wisdom. So if you do have a low wisdom, it does mean that the condition will not last very long. And once it is allowed to lapse, then you can scour it. But yeah. And then of course, yeah, like I said, having lower wisdom means that you are more likely to have a paradox condition.
Okay. So it does have that effect. I'm still sort of surprised by it not having sort of a persistent mechanical effect similar to humanity, because
the biggest
as
ones
far
there.
as
Go ahead.
sorry, because the way I've always had wisdom described to me by others is that the lower your wisdom, the less sympathetic you are to humanity.
Nope.
Similar to vampires.
No way. That is making it too much of a morality stat. Wisdom is not a morality stat. It does not care about how connected you are to humanity. It is how in control and how wisely you are applying your power. Okay. So there are two knock-on effects from this, besides the mechanical stuff, right? Well, one, oh no, as a vampire, my humanity stat has gotten lower. Oh no, I'm losing social stuff on mortals. Those things that you hunt and really don't actually need to have social roles with, because you can just kind of look at them, give them a wink, and all of a sudden they're now enslaved to your mind. Oh no, my social roles. Similarly, mages can be the same thing about wisdom, right? The lower their wisdom, the less they care about wisdom, the more things they can do without even rolling acts of hubris. However, and this is something we will probably get into more later with this, but it may come up in this section of our discussion. But all the other mages are going to be watching you. And if they note that your wisdom has started to sink, they're going to go, hey, buddy, are you okay? Because low wisdom mages are a problem. Not just for the pentacle and us good guys, air quotes there, but for the seers. Because low wisdom is abyssal and magic run amok, and neither side want that.
Gotcha. That is an aspect of mage that, while I appreciate it exists, I always find it a little bit. It feels like it's very much in the mage, like mage has their box, and a lot of stuff is specifically built around the mage box. This is where I have my feelings of mage is I like mage as a game on its own sometimes, but as soon as I bring it in with this the Chronicles of Darkness zoo type game or multi-splat game, it becomes this issue of the mage. If the mages existed, like, yes, the mages exist, but if they started to start policing a lot of things, it becomes this concern of mine that eventually you have mages in every sort of pot, every sort of
You
thing,
100% do. You have mages everywhere looking at everything. Mages are nearly omniscient. So anytime, and this is a storyteller trick, right? Oh, this guy's kind of going wild. He doesn't care about wisdom. He's doing whatever he wants. Sure, send in the Guardians of the Veil who go, we need to have a talk. Come into the station. We have some questions for you. By questions, I mean we're going to tie you down, put a bag over your head, and start throwing spells to look at your past and figure out what you've been up to, because we think we found your signature Nimbus all over the place doing all sorts of things, and we can't have you doing that.
How do you feel about the feat, the feat, the merit? Sorry, my D&D was showing.
Yep.
The merit mask
Love
for
it.
Guardians of the
It's
Veil.
amazing.
You love it?
It's one of my favorites.
Why do you love it?
By having it means that you are part of the Guardians of the Veil, which means you are one of the people that they are watching most closely. And if you are abusing their stuff, because a lot of people kind of miss this, it is a prerequisite to have Guardians of the Veil status 1. You can lose status. Like, a lot of people look at it like, I'm going to join the Guardians of the Veil and I'm going to do whatever I want. And the Guardians go, we are excommunicating you. We are removing the access that you need to make this work. Whatever tricks, whatever techniques, whatever spells, whatever artifacts that allow you to create this mask, we're removing your access to it. You look at the player and go, by Sanctity of Merits, you have quite a few dots of merit back. You get all your mask merits back, and you get your Guardian of the Veil status merits back. You can spend that on some stuff. We'll discuss that later after this session.
That would be an interesting thing. I never thought of removing it if the player leaves the Guardians.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you don't get to keep that stuff if you're no longer buddied up with them. And the flip side is, Mask is so good because while everybody looks at it being the Guardians of the Veil merit, and it is, you can get 1 dot of Guardians of the Veil status as a member of any other order. You can ally with them. That is the limit that you can get in that status, but it is enough to allow you access to it. And so, yeah, that is one of the reasons to be on the good side of the Guardians. And people kind of miss that the Guardians are a resource. It's available. Yeah, you gotta deal with the fact that they're going to be keeping an eye on you, and they might be pushing you into not necessarily questionable, but stuff where you're like, wait, what are you guys doing? And you're not 100% sure. But if you're able to put up with that, it's a very useful merit. It's up there with a Gregor and ability to do crazy teamwork spells and mentally check in libraries.
It's something I should have brought up with my player when they brought a seer that had the mask merit.
Nope. Absolutely not. Holy moly.
The character's premise was they were a defector of the guardians to the seers.
Oh yeah, you
but
don't get to keep that.
yeah.
Nah.
I see in the merit, it's like it doesn't tell me really. I would have to bring it up a little bit, but it didn't seem like it told me how they gave it out and that they could rescind it. So having that as a thing to think about is something that I like.
Yeah. Specifically, the second line of the merit is the Guardians of the Veil. Their ancient practices allow these masks to become different people almost entirely. So it is the Guardians of the Veil's methods that allow this to be a thing. If you are not a Guardian of the Veil and you've lost that status, bye. You don't meet the prerequisites. That's gone. And one of the easiest ways to lose the prerequisite of Guardians of the Veil status is to, defect.
That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So going on from Wisdom, Acts of Hubris, we've got Wisdom 7 as the next charge. At Wisdom 7, a mage can bypass Acts of Hubris. And I say bypass because it's sort of like the Acts of Hubris have the different levels. If you're between, I believe, 8 and 9, the Acts of Hubris are different than once you reach 7 and 6 or so.
Right.
A mage can bypass Acts of Hubris by causing temporary negative physical and mental tilts, or by targeting a sleeper with a sensory range spell that has no visible magic to it. So it feels very much along the lines of at Wisdom, for a lot of splats, being at the 7th integrity level usually is very difficult to keep at that level. And I've had a lot of trouble, especially with my players, in getting them to do Acts of Hubris, because they will bring up arguments along the lines of, okay, there's a security guard who is bringing in new security equipment into this building. I'm going to have them break their leg or twist their ankle in order for them to drop the security camera. And from my perspective as the GM, this is just a guy doing his job, and you're just walking around and like twisting his ankle. He's going to be in pain. You're giving him the leg rack condition. That sounds like an act of hubris to me.
Nope.
However, it's Wisdom 7, and because it's temporary, because they're only doing it for a turn or something, it's not an act of hubris.
Nope.
And then you get into these other arguments where what if they're changing the mind of someone who's a slasher or something? You're like, is that an act of hubris? Is
Sure is.
It sure is.
Because again, this is where people treat wisdom like a morality stat, and it explicitly is not. It is how much control you have. And the easiest example of this is the difference between what you're describing, which is medium/understanding wisdom, and low falling wisdom, and murder. So this is one that comes up. Premeditated murder, planning out somebody's death, is an act of hubris at medium and understanding. But fit of rage, crime of passion is a act of hubris down to 1 and 3, that falling wisdom. Because you are reacting. You are not in control. You did not plan out this action. And so because of that, it's a crime against wisdom, even at the lowest levels, where you're just destroying awakened souls, is equivalent to random, spontaneous murder compared to premeditated murder, because the key thing here is the control and thought of your actions. That is what wisdom is all about.
But it's so if you are doing magic in an uncontrolled way, that is low wisdom. But if you're doing it in controlled way, that is high wisdom.
Correct. Similarly, well, it's not necessarily high wisdom, but yes, it is in that particular case medium. And that's why at high wisdom, at this level, any time the mage uses a spell to accomplish something she could do through mundane methods with little or no risk, poses the chance for degeneration. When innocent bystanders are affected by your spells, wisdoms, or actions, she is at risk as well. So the whole point is the subtlety and control. So if you want to think of it, wisdom is your rating between using magic as a scalpel or a sledgehammer. If you are being very careful in how you are casting magic and what you are doing, then welcome to high wisdom. If you are using magic kind of as a quick response with no concern about care, then welcome to lower wisdom. So in your particular case, your mage did exactly right. I'm going to twist this guy's leg, because it's not a break, right? It's just the leg rack tilt. I've caused some pain. Ow, muscle spasm. It's a couple turns. It hurts, but it's going to go away. It's not long term, and it's enough for you to bypass. What would have been dangerous is, this man is in my way. He is now dead. That's low wisdom, right? They easily could have done it. At 2 dots, mages can start killing and obliterating people. 2 dots of space, you can ban somebody out of your way. You can literally pass through the space that they had been standing in. They will suffocate and lose air in a couple hours. Actually, if it's a really, really small space, maybe just a couple minutes. But that's even easier than giving them the leg rack tilt.
Yeah. What if you were like, I'm going to set this person on fire temporarily so that he drops this security camera?
Setting somebody on fire, even though the fire may last for only a little bit of time, sounds like a considerably more long-term problem for that person, especially if you can't consider breaking points. Because somebody being inflicted by a breaking point, while it's not exactly listed here, for me is actually, it might be is it in the lower one? No. Yeah, anything that using magic and inflicting a breaking point may show up elsewhere, not in the wisdom section. But yes, if you're using magic and cause a breaking point, even though it's not from seeing the spell, I would definitely consider it a act of hubris. Also, this is the kind of stuff where I will also remind people, nothing in here says you technically need to do magic to do it. Because that's one of the things that comes up. Deliberate and premeditated murder and violence that leaves with a victim with long-term injury, like setting them on fire. Even if you threw gasoline on them and lit it. I didn't use magic. No, but you still did it. And that is still going to be an act of hubris, in my mind. Play it how you wish at your table, but if you don't do that, you're just going to have a lot of people setting themselves up with, Molotov cocktails and stuff like that, and being, it's okay, I have maximum high wisdom because I didn't do anything bad. And that's not mage.
No, that's not. This is giving me a better idea, and I do like sort of this homebrew type idea of if you cause a breaking point to a mortal, that can be considered an act of hubris.
Yeah, and I cannot remember. I feel like I have read that somewhere. I may have to find that in with sleepers or something like that. But yes,
Okay.
I'd have to find it.
Okay. So for the next part, I am going to get into the most crunchy of crunch, the charge of XP costs
Mm-hmm.
versus the other splat lines. And I don't typically like to bring up this, but it usually when an XP cost between splats is different, it's not very drastically different. It's sort of like maybe like 1 or 2 XP points or something like that. But the cost benefit for Gnosis and Arcanum
Mm-hmm.
is a lot more efficient than other supernaturals. Specifically for Gnosis, you get well, I won't say specifically for Gnosis because I didn't in my notes here I didn't separate Gnosis from Arcanum, but by increasing these two stats, you're spending 9 XP, which 9 XP is a lot. Just
Oh, you
that's
mean if you were to increase both an Arcanum
both.
and a Gnosis? Okay.
Yeah. If you were to do both, it would be 9 XP total. That's a lot. That's probably 10 sessions or so, maybe, if you're getting beats for conditions as well as aspirations and things. Um, Essentially, what you're getting is not just the Gnosis and the Arcanum, but you're also getting extra rotes because
Negative.
when you increase what?
You don't get roads. Roads cost XP separately. You may be thinking of you
Um,
get one additional praxis.
oh, Praxis.
You
Yeah,
get
one
one
additional
praxis when
Praxis.
your Gnosis goes up by one. Correct.
You get the practices for
Correct.
your improvised spell casting.
Mm-hmm. With your Arcanum,
Did
right?
I did I not bring up improvised spellcasting? Okay, never mind. Uh, attainments,
Correct.
and then multiple spells, and on average,
Well, I wouldn't
the
even go.
amount
I
of
mean, you've already covered it with practices. The spells that are
yeah.
presented in the book are examples, but yes, because you have an infinite amount of spells off once you gain a new practice, right? There's tons of effects you can
Well,
generate.
the spells do have bonus reaches,
Right. My
so
my point is, you could come up with those same things. I would lump those in with practices, but I do understand where you're coming from. Like,
yeah,
here are a bunch of examples, and I'm on board
yeah,
there. But that's, yeah, that's part of increasing your Arcanum. Yeah, it's, you get a lot. You get a lot
you get a
from
lot.
increasing your Gnosis and your Arcanum. Mm-hmm.
And I do have a couple of examples here for what you get for blood potency, primal urge, or sorry, for vampires, werewolves, and demons.
Mm-hmm.
Vampire, they're spending 9 XP. They're getting 1 blood potency, 1 clan discipline dot, and maybe a merit dot if they want to put an XP in there. Werewolf, they're getting primal urge 1 dot. They're getting an additional facet of at 2 XP and a merit dot if they want. Um, demon, demon, which is as a splat is considered on par in the same power curve as mage, maybe a little bit less, but not by much. You're getting 1 primum and then 2 embeds or exploits, which are 2 very specific abilities. Whereas with mage, if I just look at the practices, you're getting like an entire grouping of abilities. Like if you can cast a spell to give a condition, you can give essentially any condition, or at least any mundane condition as a mage.
Mm-hmm. Once you
Whereas,
reach the right practice, yeah.
yeah, once you read the right practice. So I it just feels very inflated. Like I can
Like, there's a
understand.
lot of power in being a mage. Yes, correct.
Well, it's like I can un-
Proudly.
I can understand having having the practices and spells. I don't really understand the having attainments and the extra praxis involved, because I believe you can purchase praxis on your own,
One
right?
XP. Yep.
Yeah, 1 XP. That's pretty cheap. I mean, I don't
But what is the
like
praxis?
why.
Praxises are nothing. It's a spell that you cast, and now you get to do it without mana, which is another thing people frequently forget about
Mhm.
Arcanum. It's like, oh yeah, well, a mage could have like 8 of these Arcanum, and I'm like, cool. 3 of them max don't cost mana to cast. Otherwise, they have to spend XP to pick up a Praxis version of a very specific spell, and that doesn't cost mana. Or they have to buy a Rote, which uh, can be difficult, but technically you just spend the XP. But yeah, uh, the one big thing I will point out, and I do agree, mages get a lot from Gnosis and
Mhm.
Arcanum. I would be very restrictive, and this is something that I've learned from running two mage campaigns. Be
Yes.
very restrictive on when mages are allowed to increase their Gnosis and Arcanum.
Mhm.
If your mage has shown no has progressed nowhere with their obsessions, all their XP has come from personal experiences and just events, and just, oh yeah, I did this thing, that thing, or the other, that was all super mundane, and they've taken no time to actually show them building their studies, just using magic. Maybe no. Nah, where is the study? Where's the exploration? Where, because that is what mage is, right? That's like playing vampire and going, yeah, I'm going to increase my blood potency. How are you feeding from people, or what are you doing to increase your blood potency? Now, of course, blood potency comes with the negative of having to feed on higher things. Mages have more paradox, but if they're not showing that they've studied in Arcanum, why are you getting to increase your Arcanum? And those are slightly limited as well based on tutors.
Yeah. It always confuses me with mage, because you bring up a good point with vampire. They get a negative for increasing blood potency, and
I mean,
mages
mages
get
do
the
too.
increase. They get the negative of paradox.
Mm-hmm.
But some a lot of splats, I
Oh, and more
feel,
obsessions. Don't forget that.
and more obsessions. Obsessions I have, that is in a that is the last one in this section for the mechanical issues. Um, but it does feel a little bit different than, like werewolves. They have the feeding restriction, and they also have the hunting restriction time. Their
Mm-hmm.
their hunting time increases, and their death rage increases.
Mm-hmm.
Demons get more glitches and more tells, similar to changelings. And then, of course, you have Prometheans, and Prometheans is just like, okay, do you want the entire town to hate you, or the entire county or country?
Right. Yeah. And I mean, that is some of the stuff. And again, a lot of this comes down to, you have to remember that mages rely, well, I should say, mage storytellers should rely heavily on the society that they're in. Same vampires and werewolves should actually be approached the same way. You do not have vampires by their lonesome. I mean, a vampire by their lonesome with just a bunch of humans, yeah, they can do whatever they want, right? They're a god
Yeah.
among men. Mages are similar. If there's not another mage, if there's not a society leaning in on them, then they're just kind of free to do what they want willy nilly, which is dangerous. That there, this way lies hubris. Yeah,
You need
but
the
yes,
guardian of the veil to slap them
I mean,
down.
it's not even Guardians of the Veil. If you have, well, Guardians of the Veil show up if you are having too much of a good time. If you're over here being a good guy and helping people out and trying to make things better, that's when the Seers of the Throne show up and go, "You're being too nice to people. You're making their lives easy. That ain't gonna fly." So yeah,
Mm.
you have to be careful and make sure to include such stuff. But yes, Gnosis and Arcanum is very, very um, uh, productive XP spends.
We're moving along. The last charge for the mechanical issues. Your Honor. Obsessions act as bonuses for beats without any negative mechanical downside. Unlike Banes or Tells that other supernaturals accumulate by increasing their power stat, obsessions don't do anything mechanically.
Well,
It is a narrative effect that you have to place onto your player, similar to how a dungeon master might say to the paladin, "That guy's breaking the law. You have to stop him."
a little bit. One, it does affect your acts of hubris. So if you commit an act of hubris and your obsession is tied in with it, you get to roll one less die. So do not forget that. That's on page bottom right corner of 87. Heaven help you if it ties to your vice as well. Because it could mean that, yeah, oh, it's fine. I'm rolling 3 dice for my enlightened understanding premeditated murder. But unfortunately, my vice of cruel or something related, and because I had to kill this guy because he was in the way of my obsession, congratulations, you're rolling 1 die for that act of hubris.
How much does Vice penalize by? 3? Is
1.
that it? By 1.
But
Okay.
remember, at max, you're rolling 5 dice.
Okay. And you want a success, or do you want to fail?
You
on
want a
it?
success.
Okay. You want a success. Okay. Okay. The obsessions is just it. I always have this issue with a lot of narrative based effects,
Mm-hmm.
and like my players, I love them to death. They'll act into the obsessions often. Sometimes like it's on me a bit. I don't. If I have a session lined up and it doesn't include their obsession, it sort of feels like the obsession doesn't even matter
Mm-hmm.
because
Yeah. Well, and
there's no.
it should drive the mage nuts a little bit, which yeah. Also, one of the other things, and this is a great one, storytellers out there, obsessions count with doors. If you're not using doors to manipulate and move your mages into doing stuff that they normally wouldn't want to do, yeah, you should do that. Because say you have a vampire friend who's like, hey, mage, I need your help with something. If you do it, I'll help you out with that obsession thing of yours. That automatically opens a door.
That's
Just automatically.
awesome.
There's no roll. It's just like, hey, you know that thing that you're always talking about? I'll help you with that. Door opened.
I really like that in regards to, especially with like mage NPCs, because it adds an additional way to leverage
And there's a
leverage them.
bunch of spells as well that will do this. There's spells that will even change or replace obsession, similar to how rampant and megalomaniacal work, where one of your obsessions gets replaced.
Mhm.
Yeah, it opens you up to more manipulation because you are obsessed. And of course,
Okay.
every time you successfully open that final door and stuff like that, well, subsequent stuff has one less door. So, yes, if your vampire friend wants to manipulate a mage, every single time they're starting with one less fewer door. And next thing you know, this mage is just like, oh yeah, vampire buddy, and you're gonna, what do you need? And you're gonna help me with that obsession and that obsession? Well, you were so good last time. Yeah, let's just do it right now. Now there are some controls and stuff like that for players who go, "Hey, my character is not going to do that." That's fine. Player then gets a condition applied to them, and while yes, we're big fans of, oh, I can resolve a mental condition with pattern restoration, social conditions not so much. And also, I would not
Mm,
restrict yourself to the conditions that are in the back of the book. I would come up with something interesting. If a vampire or changeling or werewolf or whatever comes and does all this manipulation and helps you out, and then you go, no, I still don't want to do that. Cool. Here's this condition, and set them up, because that's the thing. Let it be known to the entire mage community that this guy consorts with the dead. And we're not talking about the ghosts. We're talking about the creepy bloodsuckers.
mm. That's a good idea. That's basically like giving like the ostracized or
Mm-hmm.
loner at condition if there was one.
Yep.
I
Oh
don't
yeah.
think
Well,
there
and
is.
that's the thing. Make them up. Yeah.
Yeah. That's something the books don't really do as much as the social conditions, I feel. Because it's usually the conditions are geared mainly to the mental and the physical, I
Mm-hmm.
think. Like it's not swooned isn't, oh, you're like socially like had a good interaction with this person. No, it's you've been seduced, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mentally seduced.
Yeah.
Okay. Those are all good things to keep in mind with obsessions. Keep that on your under your hat.
Yep.
Uh, I think we still have some time right now.
Mm-hmm.
And then we've got 3 lore issues with Mage that I have. Now
Oh sure.
these can always be hand waved away as this is your ask your storyteller.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of why I didn't put a lot of them in here. But the first charge of lore, is the gauntlet actually an exarch?
No,
Okay.
that wouldn't make any
Because
sense at all.
in the signs of sorcery book or
Mm-hmm.
whatever it's
Mm-hmm. Sense and sorcery.
called, it mentions the nemesis being an aspect more akin to the gauntlet than the shadow.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had people say that the exarchs created the gauntlet, or that the nemesis created the gauntlet.
Hey, that's perfect. I mean, you could say that, sure. You can say all sorts
and
of stuff, and the exarchs would happily take credit for that. But no, it's less about um uh it being the gauntlet so much as it wants to enforce the gauntlet. It does not want spirit things to get through, because spirit things, weird things, anything that brings the supernatural into contact with humans is bad, because that makes them start to question, which turns them into a prospect, which means they might awaken.
Mhm. So does the fallen world extend outside of outside of Earth? Does
Yes.
it extend to the underworld,
Yes.
the shadow, and everything?
The fallen world is literally everything that is not the supernal.
So I actually skipped ahead. That was my third option. So the supernatural domains are included. The hedge, the shadow, everything's included.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. Now here's the big question. What about all the supernatural entities? Were
Yep.
they created as part of the fallen world?
No, bear in mind, the fallen world was not created, right? The fallen
Mhm.
world is the world that we have now that the supernal is separate, very separate from uh the supernal. And sure, the fallen world, our world, the what Archmages called the phenomenal world, the place where things appear and take place, is separate from the supernal. And so and this is, again, it's lore, and technically you even have to go into first edition for this, but all these things existed in some way, form, or fashion. And again, the way the splats are written is that Mage exists in Mage, vampires, werewolves, changelings, all those things do not exist when you read the core rulebook. All this other stuff you can bring in, and it is up to the storyteller to figure out how it works. Because werewolf has several creation myths. Beast shows up and goes, hey, about that, let me introduce you to the Dark Mother. And you're going, no, I'm not related to her at all. Well, Beast says you are. And a lot of people go, well, if Beast says it and says that the werewolves are taught a lie, then it must be true. No, it's not. All this stuff conflicts. Don't get me started in the fact that there are 2 Arcadias in existence. Yes, they are different places. But why would they name them the same thing? One, because the splats, as written by Onyx Path and created, were not intended that they cross over. There are ways to cross over. They present that in Contagion Chronicle and Dark Eras, but that doesn't mean that they have to. So they can just exist in their own worlds, and they don't have to intermingle. But because people like to do that, because we all love our vampire versus werewolf stories, then you have some further considerations to take into effect. But it doesn't mean that they have to.
Yeah. And then and there's, it's sort of like having a character named Steve in a story. Doesn't mean he's the only Steve that you're ever going to see. Just look, not just Arcadia, there's the thing that always comes up to me is Reapers. Reaper is a term that gets thrown around a lot in the books. I think there are at least 3 different types of Reapers.
The Geist one. I think there's a Hunter one.
And there's a Mage one, I believe. I believe there's
yeah. When you're talking about we try to use oh my gosh, what are they called? My mind just went blank. Tremere. Get there eventually. Tremere technically are a subset of Reapers, and Reapers are just anybody who steals souls, but Tremere are the primary problems. But yeah, we use Reapers 3 different ways. The way you interact with spirits is very different if you're a mage or if you're a werewolf. Well, what is one right or wrong? No, they're just different.
Even though Chronicles of Darkness, so even though like the World of Darkness itself is built around not having these splats interact as much, the Chronicles of Darkness, and this segues into, I'm just double checking time, we have 45 minutes. We might be able to get through these. I don't know.
I think we should pause. That'll let me go through, because this is going to get into more discussion-y stuff.
Okay.
And that'll also give us a little chance to see if there's anything else we want to add.
Okay.
Yeah. And also that way we don't run into let's try and fit it in the last 45 minutes. That'll let us talk and chat a little bit more.
Dun dun! Dun dun!